Hello everyone, Fred here. In this installment of TPP Dynamite, I'm going to be reviewing the Peacock streaming movie Mr. Monk's Last Case. First things first though, if you haven't already, let me encourage you to subscribe to my channel. I post film, book, and TV series reviews. I do opinion pieces on entertainment, news, and affairs. I'm also an author of adult and young adult mystery novels. To date, I've released 3 books: The Women in White, The Lethal List, and Textbook Murder. They're all on sale. There are purchase links in my video description below, and I encourage you to check them all out. With that in mind, and without further ado, welcome to my spoiler-filled review of Mr. Monk's Last Case, a Monk movie. Monk returns to solve one last, very personal case involving his beloved stepdaughter Molly, a journalist preparing for her wedding. Those of you who are subscribed should know that this review has been about 8 months in coming. I loved the TV series Monk, which aired on the USA Network from 2002 to 2009, even though I first discovered the series after it ended. And I was very pleased when I heard that a reunion movie was going to be happening. I discussed in 3 prior videos some hopes and concerns that I had for this movie, and I'm happy to report that while a few of my concerns were very well founded, the movie itself was a very satisfying revival event whose positives ultimately outweighed its negatives. Okay, so to get this out of the way, first I'm going to get into the negatives of this movie, the bad. This movie was, for a long while, frustratingly depressing. Adrian Monk, for most of this film, feels so useless and like such a failure that his primary hobby in life is planning his own suicide. The TV show ended with Monk in a very good place, as close to happiness as a man like him can get, so it felt a little disheartening that this movie, Monk's first reappearance in a proper mystery since the show ended, depicts him in a state where he's even worse than he was at the start of the TV series, when he was riddled with phobias and OCD. It made me, as a fan of the TV show, feel like I'd watched him make all that progress over 8 seasons for no reason. Granted, this movie does provide a reasonable explanation for Adrian's collapse. The COVID-19 pandemic made him spiral back into his OCD and germophobic nature, which he had largely overcome by the end of the TV series. Meanwhile, he feels useless in this movie because when a publishing deal falls through, he can't pay for his stepdaughter's wedding, and he feels alone because Natalie and most of his other friends have moved on to greener pastures. It all makes sense for Adrian's character that he would go that dark as a result of the things that happened to him or have happened to him leading up to this movie. It's just a disappointing downer though, considering that the TV show left him in a triumphant finale 14 years ago. The villain and mystery in this movie were amongst the worst that I've seen from the Monk franchise since its start. Andy Breckman, creator of the Monk TV show and writer of this movie, said that a big inspiration for Monk's format is the Columbo style of telling mysteries where the murderer's identity is known, but where the tension comes from seeing how the protagonist will catch the murderer. The Monk show often used that plot device, and this movie does as well. A big difference between this movie and the show, however, as well as a big difference between this movie and the eminently more successful Columbo, is that instead of presenting clues and twists that keep viewers off guard, this movie's mystery is very linear and very predictable. It doesn't even feel half as interesting as many of the other cases that Adrian Monk solved in the TV show, and plenty of those didn't feel very interesting either. Molly's fiance, Griffin, is a stereotypical crusading reporter who is investigating tech billionaire Rick Eden for the suspicious death of a business partner, and who makes the stupid move of telling Rick that he is on to him and is planning to publish a takedown piece regarding him, alongside evidence of his guilt. But surprise, surprise, Griffin himself dies in a seemingly tragic accident before he can go to print. It's hard to care about Griffin as anything other than just a good guy who meets a tragic end because he's only on screen for maybe 5 minutes and was never in the Monk TV show before. Unlike most howdunit mysteries from the Monk TV show, or even from Columbo, this movie's howdunit mystery is painfully obvious from the start. Griffin, a bungee jumper, is killed when he makes a jump with a rope that's too long. Since Griffin is known for measuring and cutting his own ropes in his home garage before he jumps, the police assume that he accidentally made his own bungee rope too long. But once Adrian deduces that a burglar broke into Griffin's garage on the night before Griffin died, it becomes clear to the viewer that the murderer tampered with Griffin's measuring equipment to trick him into jumping with a rope that would be too long. So watching Adrian catch up to that realization was just frustrating and not exciting. The whole tape measure tampering plot was just too far-fetched and convoluted also. True, many of the murder plots from the Monk TV show were ridiculous, but this one somehow seemed even more ludicrous than usual. How would Griffin's killer even know where Griffin's tape measuring equipment was during the break-in? How would the killer know that Griffin would use a specific tape measurer from his garage as opposed to one from someplace else? The end of this mystery was very preposterous. I mean, how could Adrian even prove Rick's guilt just because someone broke into Griffin's garage and planted a faulty tape measurer? Adrian's entire case against Rick by the end of this movie is circumstantial, and the only witness who could corroborate it is dead by the time that Rick is arrested. The cops could try to build a case against Rick, but there's a high likelihood that someone of Rick's resources could beat that case in court, easily. The use of Molly's wedding to draw Randy Disher and Natalie Teeger back to San Francisco was a clearly contrived way to reunite most of the main cast. Also clearly contrived was the fact that Leland Stottlemyre just happened to be working as head of security for Rick Eden, in a position where he can both create tension by butting heads with Adrian over Rick's probable innocence, and eventually provide Adrian with vital assistance in taking Rick down. The trope with Adrian's hallucinations, particularly of Trudy, throughout the movie was over the top. Again, it makes sense given that the character of Adrian Monk is a man who basically lives in his own reality. It makes sense that Adrian, as characterized in the show and in the movie, would have those sorts of visions and essential conversations with himself by proxy of his dead wife's memory. And Adrian did hallucinate Trudy's spirits several times during the TV show, but the hallucinations felt more natural in the show because they were used more sparingly. In this movie, Adrian hallucinates Trudy to talk himself out of suicide twice and to keep himself company many other times. It happens so much that it almost gives the movie a supernatural flair that makes things weird. Monk has never been that kind of story. And that ties into my final major issue that I had with the movie, which is the ending. The ending was embarrassingly on the nose and cheesy. The end of this movie has Adrian hallucinate Trudy's ghost, Griffin's ghost, the ghost of every victim whose murder he solved, and the ghosts of victims whose cases he has yet to solve. The ghosts all convince him not to commit suicide. They convince him that he has made a difference, and they convince him to go on saving people and avenging those who are taken unjustly. It's all very reminiscent of It's a Wonderful Life, a movie that was one of Andy Breckman's inspirations for writing this film, but it all just feels way too supernatural and too meta for the Monk universe. Now, the good. Despite the obvious contrivances that unfold to get Adrian and his colleagues back together, their chemistry and banter, still strong as ever even after 14 years, is this movie's saving grace. We get plenty of touching updates on just how well life has been treating most of the characters in the time since the Monk show ended. Natalie and Steve are happily married and live near Julie in Atlanta. Randy and Sharona are happily married. Randy is still happy in his job as a sheriff. Sharona's son, Benji, is a happy father now. Leland and TK are happily married and living a life of luxury because of Leland's new job in private security, etc. Andy Breckman is not the best screenwriter, but one thing I love about his style is his firm belief in giving characters happy endings unless the story specifically calls for the contrary, and that's well on display here. The reunion of the main characters is also the gateway into a large amount of the nostalgia that dominates this movie, which improves it even more. It was just so fun to me to see the many callbacks to gags from the original Monk series. There was the use of the original Monk score, the callback to the first scene of season 1, the bickering between Adrian and Natalie, the reference to the Randy Disher project. We see Randy come up with another of his crazy but hilarious hypotheses on how the murderer carried out the crime using a cool high-tech Lego rig. We get another Randy Newman song that is totally appropriate for a very sad but very real scene later on in this movie. At the very end, we get a callback to the iconic It's a Jungle Out There theme, as well as the original theme for the Monk TV series in season 1. It is all just so heartwarming, and it all makes this movie worth watching just to see it connect with the charm of the original series. James Purefoy does a great job in bringing the charm of Rick Eden as a ruthless but brilliant and silver-tongued billionaire businessman who doesn't think twice about murdering to get his way and who legitimately believes that justice should be for sale to the highest bidder. This movie's villain problem is not about the actor so much as the storyline into which he's written. This movie does a terrific job of handling the gravity of Adrian's situation with the sort of stark realism that I suspect may not have been allowed had this movie aired on USA back in the day. The fact that Adrian spends this entire movie planning his own suicide is so dark and handled so well that you can't help but sympathize with his depression over how almost everyone he knows has left, and how the final straw of his being unable to pay for Molly's wedding drives him over the edge because his helping his stepdaughter was to him the one good thing he could do to give his life meaning. His imagining Trudy in anticipation of joining her in death was very much on the nose, but was also a very effective way of driving home just how badly Adrian was hurted. The hallucinations of Trudy and eventually the other victims were also clever ways of telegraphing that despite how sad and lost Adrian was, some part of him still held on to hope. Those times Trudy talks him out of killing himself are really times when he talks himself off the ledge. When the hallucinations of Trudy and the other victims talk him into finding peace and carrying on with his life in the end, he's really doing that with himself. No matter how much he claimed to want to end his existence, he still always had a glimmer of light inside him, and that makes his turnaround at the movie's end more fulfilling and easier to accept in that it felt earned versus random. Despite its problems, this movie's ending was still beautifully moving. Adrian, finally and for the first time in his life, finds real peace. He realizes that he's not alone and that his purpose is to use his skills to give a voice to victims who have been made voiceless. Here's hoping that this time his happy ending sticks and that it isn't all undone again if there is another movie. Alright, so brass tacks. Mr. Monk's Last Case, a Monk movie, is a flawed but entertaining film that suffers from a lackluster mystery plot but triumphs by employing nostalgia and treating Adrian Monk with gravity and depth as it explores his purpose and legacy in life. All told, I really wouldn't mind seeing more of these Monk films. This one was way better than the first revival film for Psych. Despite how lackluster that film was, Peacock gave it 2 sequels and has plans for more, so I feel like Monk should at least get the same deal. At least. I give Mr. Monk's Last Case, a Monk movie, 3.5 Cronuts out of 5. At any rate, let me know what you think. How did you guys feel about this movie? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Are your feelings more complex? Sound off in the comments below. Meanwhile, if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, click subscribe, ring that bell, and hey, follow me on social media as well. So long.